which part do we look at? Because honestly, folks, I mean, a lot of times I don't have anything in notes, and I do have some notes this morning, and I may look at them and I may not. But as we look at these things together, I think this is extremely important, and it may be that next week we have to continue on with the process a little bit. Last week, we were looking at proof. And in the process of looking at proof and discussing the proof that we have of God, of Jesus, of creation, of all of those things, and looking at what we can call apologetics or Christian evidences and some of those things that come into it, we basically concluded almost as if Solomon coming to the end and saying, when all has been said and done, the whole duty of man is to fear God and keep his commandments. We went to Hebrews and saw that regardless of what proof that there is and what proof people ask us for and whatever we can give them, that without faith it is impossible to please God. Hebrews 11 and verse 6. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. And that faith is something, he says it's the substance, or it's the very thing of what we believe in that we can't see. That we have to believe that it's there, and it causes something within us that is a response. We've got on the back of the bulletin the title, God is in Control. There are some passages of Scripture that I want us to consider. One is in Judges chapter 7, and it's the story, and really it starts before chapter 7. You go back into chapter 6, and let's go ahead and turn back there, because I want to look at this, and it's not the first time that in this time frame that we spend together that we have discussed Gideon and the things that happened within Gideon's life. But in chapter 6, we find out the approach to Gideon by an angel of God. The situation is, and if you're familiar with Judges, what happens is the people of God, they've gone into the land. They want a king like everybody else has got a king, and they didn't do everything that God told them to do. Joshua was faithful during his life, and he called upon the people to make the choice to be faithful to God as well. And he even said about them, he said, "You're witnesses against yourself." You say, when Joshua said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," and they said, "Us too." And he said, "Think about what you're saying." And they said, "We will." And he said, "You're witnesses against yourself. You won't." And Joshua wasn't perfect. I mean, he made some mistakes as well, even in the process of driving out and even destroying the people that God told him to completely destroy. Not all of them were. And because of that, they are a thorn in the side, so to speak, and even worse than that, to the people of Israel. And that's what's happening in Judges is over and over again, God has to send somebody to deliver the nation of Israel. They'll do good for a while, and then they won't do so good for a while. And then God has to send another judge. And that's what's happening here. The Midianites have come in. They have absolutely terrified the Israelite people. And they're coming in. They're taking their grain from them. They're taking everything away from them. And they're oppressing them as a people. Gideon is in a wine press, but he's threshing out wheat. That's not where you would normally thresh out wheat. You would do that actually outside so the wind would take the chaff away. You'd throw it up in the air and the wind would come and it'd blow the little light feathery part of it away, and you'd keep doing that until all you had was a solid wheat left. He was inside the wine press doing it because he was afraid of the Midianites and he didn't want them to come and get the wheat. So he was hiding in there, and the angel of the Lord comes to him. Verse 11, chapter 6, Judges. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior." I've got to grin at that part. I mean, here's Gideon, and Gideon doesn't get it either. I mean, he doesn't what are you talking about, valiant warrior? Gideon there was nothing about him that we have any background that was warrior-like at all, and he explains this. It says, "Then Gideon said to him, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not the Lord bring us from Egypt?" But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. The Lord looked at him and said, go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? He said to him, O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is least in Manasseh. And when he said Manasseh, they would understand that. We didn't understand it so much. I mean, considered one of the least of the tribes, as far as mighty is concerned, the tribes of Israel. How shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is least in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's house. Least tribe, least family, least person in the family. How can I do it? Besides that, he's hiding out from the Midianites right now. That doesn't sound like a valiant warrior. But the Lord said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man. So Gideon said to him, and he begins to kind of bargain with God. Okay, if it's me, I need you to do this. And then the next day, okay, if this was really you, then I need you to do this. And this bargaining situation starts happening. And another interesting point, after that happens and Gideon is convinced, somewhat convinced, there's another thing that he tells him to do. Verse 25, it says, now on the same night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull and a second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it. And build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of this stronghold in an orderly manner, and take a second bull, and offer a burnt offering from the wood of the Asherah, which you shall cut down. Now, here is Gideon hiding out, threshing out wheat in the winepress, and the angel of the Lord comes to him. He's least in his family. His family's least in the tribe. And not only that, but it's pretty much the least tribe in Israel. But then you put on top of that this deliverer of Israel, his father has an altar to Baal, a false god, and an altar to Asherah pole, if you will, beside the altar of Baal, which was the female deity that would have been in existence during the time, that they borrowed these from the people of the land. What influence is this man going to have? This is his father that actually has this altar that other people will come to and offer for this false god named Baal. It would be as today that somebody's going to take up leadership for all of the Christian people in America, and the guy's father, has an altar to Buddha. I'll just throw one out. Or is a follower of Islam. And there are no credentials. And he's been hiding this whole time. How many would accept him? How many would say, yeah, that's our leader. That's the guy we want representing us? Not very many, right? No. That wouldn't be our way of thinking. That would not have been the Israelites' way of thinking either. But this was God's way of thinking. It's interesting as you go through the story, and this is where it comes to chapter 7. We're not covering near all of this. It's just amazing what God does with him. But they start out with 32,000 people. 32,000, not people, but actually those who are coming out to go into battle, because God's going to take Gideon and he's going to lead these people. And God says, okay, first, if anybody's afraid, you tell them to go home. If there is any fear. Now, remember, we started out with Gideon being afraid, but he says if anybody's afraid, you tell them to go home. So out of these soldiers, 22,000 go home. So that leaves 10,000 that they're now going to go up against the Midianites. You think, okay, they were afraid, but they still could have gone out. They still would have been a force. They still could have gone into battle. God thinned them out. As if that wasn't enough, and a lot of us know the story about them having to go down to the river and drink, and whether they lapped like a dog or whether they picked it up in their hands, and that. God says, the ones that lap like a dog, these are the ones that I'm going to have you keep, and there's 300 that do, and so they are now, the rest of them, he says, send back home. And God says, so that you will not say, we did. So you will not brag, so you will not boast, so you won't get in your heart, in your head, that you are the ones that are delivering yourselves. You're going up against the Midianites with 300 men. We wouldn't do this, would we? This is not something that people do, but this is what God was doing. He was completely in control. And fear had something to do with this all along, and yet God was causing this to happen. They went up against them. They did exactly what God had said. Actually, there was a situation where God sent Gideon down because he needed to reassure Gideon. Because, folks, this is not the way Gideon would have done it either. So he sent Gideon down, and he heard, two Midianites talking, and one had a dream of what was going to happen, that the Israelites are going to overthrow them, and all this. So Gideon, he's ready to go. So they do it exactly the way that, and the pictures and the torches and the hollering and all this stuff that's going on. If you haven't read it, read it. It's fascinating. God was in control, and he delivered Israel through Gideon. Just absolutely amazing in a way that no way could man have come up with this plan. God was in control. Over and over again, as we read through the Old Testament scriptures, we see the same kind of thing, not just with individuals, but the things that happen with individuals. That God would choose Moses. And of course, we know the background of the story of Moses. We know how his mother took this young baby and, even in fear, placed this baby in a basket, having no idea what was going to happen. But to save him from being slaughtered by Pharaoh as a baby, because the baby boys were being killed. And to save him from that happening, placed him in a basket. We know all that background story, but then when it comes to a point, Moses being raised in the palace, Pharaoh's daughter, and actually called in as a handmaid, which is just, you see God all over this. But then when he grows up to be a man, and the recognition of who he is, he's not an Egyptian after all, and an Egyptian stands up and strikes one of the Israelites, and Moses gets mad, and he flies in a fit of terror for the man, fury, and the Egyptian. And when he does, he runs. Folks, yes, he was protecting somebody. He was the Egyptian. There's no indication the Egyptian was going to kill the guy. He was abusing him as a slave. There's no indication he was going to kill the guy. So this was in effect murder. And he fled into the wilderness, and that's where he was going to stay. He couldn't go back. And this is the one that God picks to deliver his people, a murderer that runs away and hides. Yeah, he's the one. Over and over again, and even the things that we see God doing through Moses, the things that we see that God does through Jeremiah, the things that David. Here are 7 sons. Solomon is told, you're going to anoint a new king. Saul was king. His heart has gone bad. And God says, okay, Solomon, you're going to appoint a new king. Go to Jesse's house. When you get there, I'll show you. It's one of his sons. So he goes to Jesse's house, and of course Jesse says, we're going to sit down and eat. And he says, no, first things first. I need your son to come before me. I'm going to anoint him king. So here comes the oldest, and he comes in, and God has to tell. Solomon is thinking, oh, this guy, he's tall, he's handsome, he's good looking, he's built, and he says, this has got to be God's anointed right here. And God is telling Solomon all along, no, don't look at his stature. I keep saying Solomon. Okay, sorry about that. Samuel, thank you. Got too many stories going on in my head right now. That's part of that prayer part that I asked for to start with. Samuel said, he was thinking in his mind, this is it. God is telling Samuel, no, don't look at his stature. Don't look at how he looks, because that's not the way I'm looking. That's not what I'm doing. And so he says, do you have another son? Yeah. He brings him in. 7 sons come in, and Samuel the whole time is thinking, hey, it's got to be this. No, it's not this one. Next one come in. No, it's not that one. He's done. And he says to Jesse, do you have any more sons? 7 of them come. He says, yeah, I've got, there's the youngest, David. He's out taking care of the sheep. And he said, well, go get him. So he brings David in. He comes in, and it describes him as ruddy. This young boy comes in, and he's standing there. God says, that's the one. Go anoint him. mean, Samuel would have picked the first one because he was the best-looking one. He was the oldest. He would have been the natural one that you would have thought that would have been king next. But it wasn't the way even Samuel was thinking. And he was a man of God. I mean, he was wanting to follow God. It's not any condemnation against Samuel whatsoever. He was just responding to what he thought would have been best. But he listened to God, and he did exactly what God told him to do. He anointed David. And, I mean, the rest of the story is just fantastic, how God works with that and brings David to the position of power that he brings him before he actually takes seat on the throne. Over and over again, we see that kind of thing within Scripture. And what we have to realize in all these circumstances is God is in control. He's the one that is in control. The circumstances that present themselves to people that sometimes would choose something different, sometimes would see things and reason, no, it's got to be this way. And it's very easy for us to do that. It's easy for us to do it as individuals within our own life and to think, okay, this is the way that it's got to be because of reason, because of logic, because of the culture that we live in, because of the world that we live in, maybe because of our own experience. And we chalk that up as wisdom, and we've got experience in this, so we know it would have to be this way. But we recognize that so many times in God's plan, it wouldn't have gone the way of experience. It wouldn't have gone the way that man would think, okay, it's got to be, logically, it's got to be this way, because this one, there's no way that this one will work. Even Gideon himself, no, I'm least, I can't do it. I wouldn't be the one. He was the one. Moses, 5 excuses right off the bat. I can't speak. It's not me. There's no way I can do it. These people won't follow me. I've murdered an Egyptian. They won't follow me. He just keeps giving these excuses. God says, it is you. Gideon said, I've heard the stories of all the miracles that you did to bring us into this land. He heard the stories about Moses. He heard the stories about Joshua. He heard all these stories about the amazing things that God had done, and he had seen nothing in his life. Nothing in his life that he could fasten onto to say, because of this, I'm going to hang on to you, Lord. I mean, there was a belief. I mean, he didn't deny that God exists, but he says, the Lord's just turned us over to the Midianites. He doesn't seem to care about us anymore. And this is human reasoning. There are times that we will pray prayers and we think, okay, it's time that we have this prayer answered. I've been praying this and I've been praying this, for a whole week, and I haven't got an answer. 2 weeks go by. And we begin to get discouraged because 2 weeks have gone by and we don't have an answer to our prayer. Really? When we look at the lives of people and how Gideon must have been feeling, he didn't give up on God. The God was real. God was still there. And sometimes people do that. They say, well, why do I even believe? Is God even there? And doubt comes in. Turn to Hebrews 11. We were there last week. We're going there again. And last week, I had known that we were coming here again this week. But we're going to start at the same place. But I want to see within this chapter the things that God is saying that we didn't cover last week. Starting in verse 1, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. I think I mentioned last week, this is not a definition of faith. It's more of a description. The assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. There are things we don't see, and so we don't understand. That's the way it is with circumstances that sometimes we have to make decisions in. That there are things that we have to make that decision in faith because we can't see it. What we've experienced, what we know to be best, would make us want to do something different. But for whatever reason, we recognize we've got to follow God's leading. The assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the men of old gained approval. By it the men of old gained approval. By faith we understood that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. By faith Abel offered to God, and he starts going on. He offered these better sacrifices than Cain, and he starts describing these. By faith we believe that God made the world out of things that couldn't be seen. But God did it, and he made something that could be seen. By faith we believe that. It was the men of old that he's getting ready to mention, and he has women within these too as he goes through and mentions these people. They were approved by God because of faith. Because they took a step even when they didn't know where that step was going to go. When Abraham left his home and he went to a place that God says, I'll show you when you get there, that you take a step of faith and you don't even know where you're walking to. That's the kind of faith that we're talking about here, is that when we can't see it, when we can't plan it out, and even if we did, it would be wrong, so we have to trust God and take a step of faith. Does that make any sense? So he starts listing all these, and he talks about Noah, and he talks about Abraham. And you come down to verse 13, and he says, all these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. All these died in faith without receiving the promises. The main promise that was given was one that was given to Abraham, that through his seed, through his offspring, all the families of the earth would be blessed. Not just his direct offspring, the Israelites eventually, but Abraham lived his whole life and he didn't see that happen. Isaac, his son, lived that his whole life and he didn't see that happen. Jacob lived his whole life. The tribes of Israel, as they formed, they lived their lives out, and we can read some of their history that God has recorded for us. They lived their lives, and they didn't see the promise to Abraham fulfilled, that all the families of the earth would be blessed in Abraham's offspring. They seen what God had done with them. They saw some mighty things. They got discouraged a lot of times, and they were resistant to God over and over and over again. Those who remained faithful still didn't see the promise. And so over in verse 36, as he's describing what a lot of these people went through, these people that, remember, did not receive the promise. The promise was there. The promise was good, and God was going to keep it. They just didn't get to experience it. But he says of them, and others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonments. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were tempted. They were put to death with a sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy. These people experienced the worst. Does anybody know a story in the Old Testament where somebody was sawn in two? I'm asking. You know, as I've read through this, and I mean, it dawns on me every time, and I'll go back and look again, and I didn't, this week I didn't go back and look. And I hope that I'm missing it somewhere. You know, I've read through that, but that's the thing. We don't even have it all wrote down. We don't have everything that happened recorded. We have what we need recorded. I mean, just like John says about the acts of Jesus, I mean, there wouldn't be books enough to contain everything that happened, everything that he did. I mean, we can't even understand everything that he did spiritually while he was here. But there were people, person after person, that stood in faith, that endured so much. being sawn in two, being stoned to death. And they remain faithful. Human reasoning would say what? Is it worth it? No. Human reasoning would automatically say, I don't know if I should keep doing this or not. Why am I doing this? Why am I going through this? It says that they lived destitute, afflicted, ill-treated. Verse 39, and all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us. They didn't receive what was promised because God had something better for us. So that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. The word perfect really carrying the idea of completeness. Apart from us, apart from those who have faith today in Jesus Christ, they would not be made complete. It wasn't completed until he did what he did. And we see faith exhibited in us. Or do we? They are made complete by us. These people who endured all of these things, who went about in life just having to, put goatskins on to find something to wear. They lived in caves because they were afraid and they were running from people like Ahab and Jezebel. They were stoned, they were sawn, they were starved to death, they were fed to lions. All these things that happen to people. And they're made complete in us, in our faith. Would we do it? And so he says in chapter 12, verse 1, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us. Now, he's talking, this is a first century writer talking, and he's saying, look at all those who have gone before us. It is worth it. We just need to have faith. And faith, we can't see it. Because these people, by the time he's writing this to those who are Jewish Christians, they're beginning to think exactly the same thing. Is this worth it? Do I want to keep living this way? Are we accomplishing anything? They had no way of seeing. And some of this, folks, I've listened to Andy Stanley speaking on this some, and some of this is coming from some of the things that he said, and I just want to share that part with you. Think about the early church and what they didn't know. They were small pockets of people. It started large, but as they were persecuted, they were scattered out all over the place. You had all these people in Jerusalem, and this was a big movement. But all of a sudden, when the persecution came, they were scattered. And it says they went everywhere preaching the word, which is just, fantastic that how God did that. He sent them because of persecution in all these areas. But then there were these little pockets of people. They were meeting in houses, and when they could get a hold of a letter that Paul sent to somebody else, and they'd get together and they'd read it. You can imagine their thoughts. Has anybody seen Adam? No. They went to his house and they were going to arrest him, and he wasn't there. Nobody's seen him since, and so we pray for Adam. There's persecution had reached. It had gotten there. They had to be thinking, what do we do now? Where do we go? Is this worth it? Are we accomplishing anything? They couldn't see the future that you could drive into Springfield, Missouri and see, I don't know, does anybody have any idea how many churches there are here? They had no idea. They had no idea that the world over 2,000 years later would still be accounting time according to when Jesus was born. They had no idea that there would be millions of Christians in the world. Looking at it from their standpoint, and their reasoning standpoint, it had to not make a lot of sense, and yet they were the ones that changed the world. It was their faith when by reason it wouldn't work. How can these little groups of people, because of who they were not afraid. They were following Jesus, who exhibited not being afraid. Jesus walked into Jerusalem knowing, we sang about the old rugged cross and the shame and reproach that he gladly bore. He walked in, he actually rode into Jerusalem, but he was right there, and he knew that they were coming to arrest him that evening, and he didn't run. He was ready to go to a cross that he knew what it was. He grew up from being a little boy, and as has been said, probably smelt the cross before he ever seen what was happening on one, when men would hang there for days and days. When the shame of that naked body hanging there, when the experience of knowing that this person was totally broken, Jesus didn't run. He wasn't afraid. And his followers saw that. If they didn't see it, they heard it from those who did see it, and they weren't afraid either. What about us? Are we afraid? Listen to us talk. Well, if this person gets in, it's all over. If that person gets in, it's all over. There's nothing, it's done. The economy's already shot, and it's going to just get worse regardless of who gets in. The things that we're saying. Are we afraid? Who are we fixing our eyes on? Are we fixing our eyes on Jesus, or are we fixing our eyes on economy or politics or any other thing that may be distracting us? And in no way am I saying these things aren't important, but they're not the most important. And if they're causing us to be afraid, and folks, a lot of people are weary. I've dealt with this myself, thinking, what in the world am I going to do come voting day? But that's not the most important thing. We have a God to have faith in that goes beyond all of this, that is going to work his plan regardless. Regardless. So he says, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses, we better start stockpiling food just in case. We better start being sure that we have lots of ammo. We better start getting off the grid and starting up, make sure we have our generators or our solar panels or whatever, because there's not going to be any electricity anymore. And all of a sudden, we're focusing on all kinds of things. Focusing on all kinds of things to preserve who? Ourselves. And I would like to go on with some of those things, and I don't want it to be a distraction, but there are so many things that are being said. From just, you know what I'm talking about. We become so selfish. Our eyes are really on us. Where's the faith in that? Where is the faith that God is going to take care of his own? Might we be living in goat skins? Might we be living in caves? We're so attached to our stuff. And folks, I'm preaching to me too. We are so attached to our stuff. We're afraid we're going to lose it, and we're focused on that. We don't want to lose what we have. We don't want to lose our house. We don't want to lose our car. I don't want to lose my camping bus. But if we are so focused on what we're going to lose, we're not going to say the things that we need to say. We're not going to do the things we need to do. Fear is going to keep us in the wine press threshing out wheat instead of getting us out of it and tearing down altars of Baal. What he says is, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. if it's fear and doubt, if it's focusing on other things, lay it aside. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Folks, don't grow weary. A lot of us are becoming weary because we're dreading what's going to happen within the election. God can do what he wants to with that. Even the Roman Empire and Pilate couldn't thwart the plan of God, but actually fit right into it. You wouldn't even know who Pilate was if it wasn't for Jesus. This mighty, important man in Jerusalem for the Roman government. And then he says, verse 4, you've not resisted, not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood, and you're striving against sin. Who are you to get weary and to lose heart? Look at the great cloud of witnesses and look at what they endured. Who are you to grow weary and lose heart? And folks, when we look back, and he's talking to Hebrew Christians, and we see some of the things that they were enduring, and then we look at ourselves. Who are we to get weary? I mean, might they look at us and say, you're upset about what? You're losing heart over what? What if the Christians in Syria right now that are in camps to refugee camps, or that are outside of Syria and gathered together into these refugee camps, or those in Iraq that are experiencing some of the exact same things, the things that are happening to them and to their families, that they're praying to God, Father, please protect our daughter. We don't know where she's at. They've taken her. We don't know what they're doing to her. We don't know where she's at. We don't know if she's alive. We don't know if she's dead. We don't know what they're using her for. Please, Father, watch after my daughter. What if they heard our prayers for our job? For getting our kids in a certain school, or whatever. What it might be that would seem so trivial to them. But people even that have not denied Christ and been beheaded for it, their families still not denying Christ. And standing firm because why? Faith. It's in what they don't see. They're seeing something different. They're seeing reasons to give up. They're seeing reasons to say, this isn't worth it. But they're getting stronger in faith instead of getting weaker in faith. And more people are coming to Christ. This really isn't about the election. What I have to say, and the reason I made those points, I saw those and I see, okay, that's something that we consider big. And again, I'm not trying to take away the importance of issues within the election or anything else like that, but I'm trying to place first things first, prioritize. And we need to prioritize. I want to share with you that we have a group of elders here. Not every one of them's here this morning, but would you guys stand up or wave or something? We've got two in the sound booth, Terry and John. Dale's over here. Rex is right here. And there's David over here. Deacons, those of you who are here, John's back in the sound booth. The rest of you stand up, raise your hand, something. So, okay, we have deacons here this morning. Last Sunday, being presented with a circumstance here at Parkview Christian Church These men had to sit in a board meeting and agonize over a decision. These guys typically don't get, they don't get to hear the things I get to hear. Good lesson, or, or glad you said that, or want to talk about the sermon, something like that. They don't get to hear those encouraging things a lot of times, and sometimes when they hear from us because we disagree with something they said or something they did or a decision they made, and we need to tell them about that and correct them on this or something like that. And they are men of faith that I see meeting after meeting, month after month, and not just month, but so many when they're able to, meeting even on Tuesday mornings now for prayer time to pray for those that have asked for prayer requests or others that are needing some prayer, that they recognize that and to pray together. These are men of faith that we have placed, let me change that God has placed. That if we have them as leaders, as elders of the church, that God has made them that. And yes, it's a selection process for us, and it's getting ready to start again right now. But that God has placed with us leaders that enter into decisions, and sometimes decisions, and oftentimes decisions are not easy at all, that wrestle with and try to make the right decision for us to move on and be who God needs us to be. And sometimes it has to be done in faith, even though it doesn't feel right. They were faced with one of those decisions last Sunday in the board meeting. I have shared with them that I was going to bring this up today because we were to announce something today that's going to start taking place on November the 1st. And we recognize that everybody wouldn't agree with this decision. Starting on November the 1st, during the worship time, there will be no toddler class nor a nursery during the worship time. They have looked at this and looked at the various reasons why this would be so. And because of overworking of a few and the lack of being able to have enough people to volunteer to do this. Now, we've looked at what we've looked at this morning for a reason, because one thing is, in no way does anybody need to be shamed into doing something that they do not feel led by God to be doing. The elders looking at this and examining the body that we have here, and looking at the things that are done, the resources we have, not with money, but the resources that we have with people. And I want to do something, and I realize we're running short on time here, but would everybody that's involved, and stay standing, and some of you, it would just double up on several of these things, but would everybody that's involved in the breakfast ministry, the Parkview breakfast ministry, would you stand up? And we don't even have everybody in here, and some are in the nursery and toddlers right now. If you're involved at all with the breakfast ministry, yeah, stand up. And this is a small number. We have 4 crews. And this doesn't fully represent the 4 crews. Yes, Marissa, you too. All right, and as I said, there's some that aren't even in here right now that are involved in that in some way. If you are involved in the benevolence ministry in some way, would you stand up? And some of you are already standing. We have some. No, stay standing up if you're involved in any of these. Stay standing up if you're involved in any of these. And I'm going to miss them. If you're involved with caring people in any way, would you stand up? And I know I'm going to be missing some. If you're involved, what am I missing here? What? Backpack program. If you're involved in the backpack program, and again we have some missing, but yeah, stand up. You need to stand up too. Wednesday night's the next one I was going to mention. If you're involved in Wednesday nights and what goes on here Wednesday nights, teaching or even being here to encourage the kids that come with the moms, just a part of that whole thing, stand up. If you are a van driver, stand up. If you're involved in worship ministry, please stand up. Okay, and now we have just named, you said one, Dale. Did you say one? Did I miss? Cooking on Wednesday night, yes. I mean, I don't know that we have so many that aren't here this morning that we would have a lot more standing. Now, keep standing for just a minute. These are just those organized ministries. And personally, as we look around, you can see so many others that are involved because we will have things come along, whether it's go ahead and sit down if you want to. Whether it's just like we have a fish fry coming up. It's just like we have a birthday party this afternoon. It's like there are constantly things that will come up. Some of you didn't stand that are involved in doing things with the youth. I think I even said that. If you've done extra things with the youth, and there are those, and you know who you are, that I'll call upon and say, would you be willing to do this? And you'll go and do that, and it's part of that. But did you look at, a lot of times you get this 20% or doing 80% of the work type thing. Anybody ever heard that before? Okay, that's not here, is it? Because even just through the organized things, we saw the involvement over those particular organized ministries. And I didn't say for all the deacons to stand up and all the elders to stand up during that process as well. Most of them were. But when you have so many resources, you need to utilize those to the best of your ability. Our elders made a decision because of the lack of resources and by some recommendations, even from those who organized those things, some even being overtaxed at times. And so when we examine that, what does that look like for us? From our visual point of view, we don't like it. Folks, I'm very serious when I say it had to be the saddest vote that I think I've ever heard in a board meeting. When it was asked, all in favor say aye, the response was the raising of the hand and kind of a aye. Because it's not what we would want to do. But what can God do with this? What we can feel as a downer, what we can be weary in and easily lose heart when we see something that we think ought to be there going away, what can God do with it that we have absolutely no idea? Look at the story time after time after time of what God did with people. I mean, you're meeting in houses and you don't seem to be making an impact. The Roman Empire is crashing down on you. How in the world can this go anywhere? And look what happened, because the people didn't give up and they weren't afraid and they stood faithful. And so really in the whole scheme of things, what is this? Even as we look, say, at an election, but in the whole scheme of things, what can God do with it? On an individual level, possibly. Or maybe it will cause us to begin to think, are we doing church the way God intends for us to do church? Or have we been doing church the same way for so many years, it's the only way that feels right? You say, wait a second. What are you talking about? What does that mean? I don't know. Could that mean small groups, that we don't have Sunday school classes, but we have small groups that decide when and where they're going to meet? That some may choose to meet here at the building at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. Some may choose to meet in a coffee house somewhere. And all of a sudden you have others interested in they see people meeting somewhere and they say, hey, what's going on? I don't know. I don't know what that means. But are we willing to have faith to let God lead us when we have a leadership that agonizes over a decision and says, this is what we need to do? And then we get behind that and we see where God can lead with that. And that may mean the ideas that can come from this, the brainstorming that may come from this, over where God will lead us with this, because we're willing to have faith and take a step when it doesn't seem like the step that we would take normally. It doesn't seem like the step that we would even want to take, but we're going to take it. And so that's where we're at. And where does God have us going with that? Does that make sense? This whole thing and everything we've been looking at with it. You want to come on up here, you can. I'm not sure what it says to you. There's application that could be, just across the board. Where you're at in your life with passages usually determines, what you're going to get out of that passage. It's just simply amazing how sometimes I can read a passage and I'm seeing one point and I can make the point and afterwards somebody says, "Oh, I'm so glad you read that passage. Here's what you told me." And I didn't say it at all, or at least I didn't think I did. Because God has something to say to you. And as an individual, wherever you're at in life, whatever stage you're at in following Jesus Christ, whether it's that point that you say, okay, I'm going to stop focusing on everything else and I'm going to focus on him. What if every Christian, just in America, and that's really limiting things, but what if every Christian in America would just say, I'm going to stop focusing on everything else, I'm going to focus on Jesus Christ. I'm going to say tomorrow and the next day, whatever it is I think Jesus would say, I'm going to do the things that I think Jesus would do. And I'm going to respond the way that he would, regardless of how I think that's going to affect me and my life and those that are around me. That's what I'm going to do. Can you imagine how that would change the world around us with as many of us as there are? But will we commit to doing that? There are others that are challenging people to do the same thing. That may be where it fits for you, is on a personal level. But it also may fit on a congregational level, on a body level. As we are the body of Christ here at this place. That on this corner, we go out from here to this community, that we have an influence because of the light of Jesus within us. And folks, the darker that it gets, the brighter light shines. Have you ever noticed that? And that's us. Leaders are not leaders unless people follow. I'm pleading with you. Let's follow. Let's see where God is going with this. As an individual, are you following Jesus? Are your eyes fixed on him? Or are you selfish? If you need to respond, whatever it says to you, come as we stand and sing together.